Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 303 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm delighted to catch up with Claire Goodwin-Fee, who has a postgraduate diploma in integrative counselling, postgraduate diploma in clinical supervision, and a level 2 and 3 in EDMR training. She also has a very, very impressive CV. Today, Claire will be speaking about her role as CEO of Frontline19, an organisation that provides confidential psychological support services for people working in the NHS and frontline services in the UK. So with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's episode 303. Rory and I are delighted to welcome you here today for our 3 topics. Starting off with our ethical sustainable practice, where we dive into safeguarding clients when you are counselling using online or telephone or technology. We then move into Practice Matters, and as Rory has already introduced, Claire Goodwin-Fee, the CEO of Frontline19, who's going to be speaking to us today. And then we move on to our student services, where today we're going to be looking at how you might go about getting the best books, buying the books and getting the resources in order for your next leg of your studies. But starting us off, a really important topic, Rory, that you've chosen here today, safeguarding clients when counselling using online technologies or the telephone.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, since COVID-19, all those years ago, it seems like an eternity ago, doesn't it, when we're in lockdown? The world of counselling has changed, and it's changed quite significantly. Before the lockdowns in 2020, online and telephone counselling was rather a niche activity, and now it's a mainstream offering. A lot of therapists have hybrid practices where they may see people in the room, may see them online. In fact, some may even be more hybrid than that. What they may very well do is they may see clients in the room and then, because of client commitments, see them online as well. Now, when you're counselling in the room, it's fairly straightforward. Client comes in, client sees you, and if anything happens, if the client becomes unwell, you could call emergency services or some support to your counselling room. Maybe you work from home, and the client can get the help they need. But if you're working online, that becomes quite a difficult task. It needs to be thought out in advance. So the first thing is pre-session preparedness. And I think that it's really important that right at the beginning, when you're working online, you do a discovery call, send out an information pack, and get the client to tell you where they are, what happens in an emergency, and also if they can nominate someone who knows they're having therapy that you can call in an emergency. And that really should be done right at the front end, right at the beginning, before you even make contact with the client. Because if you think about it, if you're working on a video platform and the client becomes unwell and faints, what do you do?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? it could be very, very serious, couldn't it, Ken?
Indeed, and this is a serious topic, and it's we've spoken about this before, where we may think because we're trained in face-to-face in the room counselling that is easily transferable into working online, but there are some differences, and what we want to be doing is thinking about what those differences are, preparing for them before we meet them, so we don't get caught out by surprise. I put together some learning outcomes for our chat on this today, Rory, starting off with what you're already been covering here. So I've got 4 points on this. The first one, understanding the necessity of risk management when you're working online, which you've covered beautifully there. Secondly, identify the components of an effective risk management plan. And then thirdly, recognize the challenges associated with online and telephone therapy in assessing risks. It's not as easy or as straightforward as it may be in the room. And then how you, for your counselling practice, can develop strategies for managing risk clients when you're working remotely. So we've kind of looked at the importance of that risk management, and I guess it brings us on to what a risk management plan might look like. And I'm going to cover 3 things here. The first one being an intake form, then secondly, really reviewing regularly what the client is bringing and where they find themselves, and then thinking before you meet with this client, what is your confidentiality and disclosure policy going to look like for working online? Is it the same as face-to-face and in the room, or do we need to kind of change that slightly? And I think that intake form is a really good starting place, because it's where we have that first contact and we're able to ask questions and gather information on who this client is, what their history is, what their current behaviors are, and we can ask them if they have any known risks that we should know about, and that information kind of might guide us in where we go with the client. And then of course regularly reviewing that. So maybe the client presented and they didn't show any high risks, but they may in the sessions kind of bring up a topic which sets off that little alarm, Rory, where we kind of go, oh, hold on a second, that seems to be stepping into a risk type of area. So that regular reviews and maybe contracting with the client, that if anything comes up that you will maybe delve a little bit deeper into that. So explaining that you the necessity of kind of assessing risks and then revisiting that. And then of course there's the confidentiality and disclosure. So it's going to be in your contract of when you break confidentiality. Now, you may be working to an ethical body, and you will see there where you have to break confidentiality because of legislation. You may have within your practice or within the agency you're working times when we need to break confidentiality, which would be in the contract. But now if we're working online, it makes it a little bit more tricky, because we're working remotely, so we maybe are not able to refer into or manage that confidentiality as we would in an agency or a local setting. And we need to understand what services need to be put around that person and to be able to hold them, I guess, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that speaks to local resources. If you're working, I'm based in Manchester. If I was working with a client in London, I may very well be looking for resources around where the client lives, maybe helplines, maybe organisations, drop-ins, that type of thing, where the client could go. I think it's very, very easy if we're working in our own locality. We probably have the famous black book. We've talked about the black book before. It doesn't have to be black. It could be a file, a computer file, where you have very, very useful resources to support clients in between sessions, or maybe you're going away on a holiday and you need to put something in place for the client so they've got some other form of contact. That becomes a little bit more challenging when you're working with a client outside your geographical area. So I think it's very, very useful once you've done the initial assessment to start to look for some resources that may be needed. They may not be needed, but may be needed should you need to ask the client to reach out. I mean, obviously, the Samaritans here in the UK is a very important number. It's easily found. And that's a very useful number to give to a client for support. But also there may be other areas of support a client needs, things like, LGBTQA plus resources. Maybe somebody's, just coming out and they need a bit of support. So if you could give them an organization or someone local to them, it's really, really useful. Which kind of brings us on to, what happens if, if something goes wrong. And I think that, as we always say in Counselling Tutor, we plan for the worst, but we do hope for the best. And sometimes I think, training in crisis intervention, thinking about what happens, should you lose a connection or should something happen, what are you going to do about it? What are your plans? Being prepared, right, Ken?
Oh, very, very much so. The strategies for managing high-risk clients, we need to consider and look what they are. That detailed risk assessment that we've already discussed is a great starting point. Your crisis intervention plan. If something should happen, what do you do? Have you thought about this beforehand, or are you trying to work that in the moment? And I guess, again, it's like you say, Rory, if you're thinking about it beforehand, you can have a look at what that looks like. And basically the aim there is to develop clear protocols for managing crisis. If that should show itself. And then something that is quite important and easily overlooked is enhanced communication. And what we mean by this is kind of speaking with the client and sharing with them that there are certain challenges or limitations in remote therapy. So those challenges might be limited observation. I'm online with you right now, Rory, and all I can see is basically a passport photograph. I can see your head and your shoulders. So maybe if you were showing a lot of stress in your hands or lower body with bouncing legs, I wouldn't be able to pick that up. So there are a few of the challenges, but back to those strategies, sharing that with the client and that enhanced communication, really encouraging them to share if they pick up something in their life or they are experiencing something specific in the moment. And I guess providing that threat-free environment where they feel safe to share that for you. And then, of course, looking at support systems. And this is for your client. So that's going back to that, looking at what support they may have in their locality, but also looking at support systems for yourself, because it isn't, even though it is so commonplace, it is still relatively new and new technology that we're using. It's only a few years old, really, these platforms that we're using. So looking to yourself, can you speak to peers? Can you speak to your supervisor about this? Having the right supervisor who has the training to be able to support you in this. I think these are all the strategies that we need to consider if we're going to be managing that high risk when it shows itself in the room, Rory. Well, it's not really in the room, absolutely. Is it? In the virtual room.
In the virtual,
in the virtual room.
Yes, on the screen or
yes.
on the receiver.
Or on the phone, yeah.
On the phone, yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things you spoke to there is training. It's just so important to be trained in online and telephone counselling. It sounds initially, doesn't it, like, how difficult could this be? You know, when you hear someone saying, well, how difficult could this be? We just use a phone or we just use a video platform. But actually, there's lots of things that need to be taken into consideration. And we actually run online and telephone counselling training. And if you're interested in that, if it's something that you think you might be interested in, if you just go to our website, counsellingtutor.com, you'll find all the details there. But it is so important to be properly trained in online and telephone counselling. And I think also, in terms of emergencies and the difference between working in the room and online is that making sure that your client's in the same place every time.
Yeah.
When I see Ken, I know he's in the same place because I can see the background of his office. And same with me. I've got my bookshelf and things, But what happens if the client turns up for an appointment and he's sat in the car? You need to think on your feet. Where are you? You need to ask them where they are. And if possible, with modern communications, send you a map location or something like this. So should anything happen, you can direct resources to that area. Yeah. Can you imagine phoning the emergency service up and saying, well, my client's
in a car somewhere.
In a car somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm sure that wouldn't go down very well. So, really thinking it through. It's very, very different to working in the room.
That I think that's the key point. It's you said training is a key point, and it's very different. And yes, Counselling Tutor offer that certificate in online and telephone working, and we have done for some time. What is surprising is when we first built that training, it's self-directed training, so you work through it at your own pace. It's 80 hours of CPD work there, and that sounds like a lot. I'm already a counsellor. I know how to counsel. How can it be 80 hours of training? The interesting thing is you're encouraged to kind of build your online practice as you're going through it. And that's where the hours are, because you're going to be revisiting and recreating your contract for online working and of course, your risk assessment procedures and all of that kind of stuff. But what is really interesting is the most common feedback we get at the end of our certificate in online and telephone counselling at Counselling Tutor is practitioners saying, I didn't know there was so much to consider. And that's the thing. We don't know what we don't know. And that's why we're called to do CPD and training, because by doing CPD and training, it kind of takes the blinkers off and it shows us what we don't know and informs us in best service of our clients. So 2 things here. Number 1, there is a absolutely fantastic super duper handout which is going to cover all those learning outcomes that we started with, the understanding the necessary of risk management in counselling, identifying the components of an I can't speak today, Rory, of an effective risk management plan, recognising the challenges associated with online and telephone therapy and assessing client risk, and of course developing your strategies for managing high-risk clients in remote counselling sessions within your practice. So that handout is available for you. All you need to do is go to counsellingtutor.com, click on our podcast tab. This is episode 303. That's nice and easy to remember, 303, and you can download that. It's free of charge. And of course, if you are interested in our certificate in online and telephone counselling training, just go to counsellingtutor.com. It's on the front page. So there it is, Rory. Risk management in counselling, ensuring client safety in a remote setting.
So important.
And now we move away from our ethical, sustainable practice and right into practice matters. Rory, you're always reaching out, speaking with experts within their field, and you had a chat with Claire Goodwin-Fee, the CEO of Frontline19, and you're going to bring us that chat today.
Yes, I'm always struck with inspirational stories, and I think Claire's story doesn't get any more inspirational. She is the daughter of a frontline worker who saw the difficulties and the unique challenges that frontline workers, I'm talking about colleagues in the police, the ambulance service, the medical profession, see, and certainly they saw during the COVID crisis, and she started up her own organisation called Frontline19 to help support those people who work in the frontline. So, those people who sometimes are the silent heroes of our society. I caught up with Claire, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Perhaps the unknown heroes of our society are frontline workers, those who may work as paramedics, fire officers, police officers, nurses, doctors, those people who work with trauma and making very difficult decisions on a day-to-day basis. And this is why I'm delighted to be speaking to Claire Goodwin-Fee, who is the CEO of Frontline, a charity which supports frontline service personnel access therapy. So Claire, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what is Frontline? What is Frontline?
So Frontline19 is it was supposed to be a very small project that I started up the day before lockdown back in 2020, March 2020, to kind of just offer a little bit of support to our frontline community. I come from a frontline background, worked in social care, my mum worked in social care, My dad was a police officer for years. So I kind of had an idea about the pressures. But I think my dad was very, very ill in King's College in London and was in a coma, and the staff were amazing. At one point I didn't know if my dad was going to survive, and I remember crying, sitting on the floor crying. One of the doctors came out and spent about half an hour talking to me and just supporting me. So fast forward to the pandemic, I kept thinking about these people and how much pressure and how difficult it would be for them. And I wanted to try and do something to help them and support them to do the really difficult work that they do. And so I set up a little Facebook page and thought, well, if I could help maybe 40, I set a target 50 people, which felt quite scary because 50 people is a lot of people. And I pressed the button on the little Facebook page, and within the first day, we had 750 people come through and said they needed support. And then I knew that it was going to be kind of a big thing. What I didn't appreciate at the time really is that this wasn't ever just about the pandemic. There are so many stresses and strains, and the level of trauma that people kind of work in and experience on a daily basis is unlike, I guess, unless you're in that community, you wouldn't really understand it. And so fast forward today, we work with 9,000 frontline workers every week. And we have an amazing group of volunteers that are qualified therapists. We'll have a few students in their final stages that also help out. And we work with the frontline sector to support them to do the amazing work that they do.
I mean, this sounds like a very much needed service. I mean, I guess in an ideal world, we'd all like to live in an ideal world where there was funding available for therapy and it was therapy on demand. But the fact of the matter is we don't live in an ideal world. We have to meet the world where it is. And sometimes, we have to ask people to volunteer, and that would be their choice. They have to choose whether to volunteer or not. So recently you've made a film showcasing what Frontline19 is doing, and that's gone pretty viral. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we've worked with an advertising agency before as a pro bono client, and we wanted to really give a voice to the frontline workers to show what they go through on a daily basis, because I don't think many people realise the intensity of the trauma that they deal with. And so I liken it to when we're waiting to cross the road and you see the kind of blue lights, and you sometimes stand there and I think, well, someone's having a really bad day today. Now, that's one call out of perhaps 8 calls during the day, during a shift for that worker. And it could be anything from a child being injured, dying, to abuse. It could be anything. And so we wanted to really highlight and kind of share that, because it is really quite exceptional what the frontline workers go through, and the fact that they don't always have the support around them to kind of help them process that and to kind of, keep going for another day. And when we first started Frontline19, I thought it would be a short-term project because of the pandemic, but actually it's so much bigger than that. And so the levels of support for frontline workers has never really been there. There's little ad hoc pockets, and for a while there were hubs that were out there, but the government obviously have withdrawn funding and stuff now. So it's really to kind of highlight what a frontline worker and what it's like to be them on a daily basis. And I will always be in awe of how many of these people keep going. Some of the horrendous stories that they tell me, and we look at it and I think, how do you keep working? How do you keep functioning with kind of some of the experiences you had?
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of frontline workers, a kind of selection of people from, forces to people who are nurses, paramedics, doctors, and they do see more than their fair share of trauma. And, sometimes we talk about PTSD, but also we might talk about moral fracture, where someone has had to make a life and death decision. Moral fracture is something that's becoming quite talked about now, certainly in service communities and frontline communities, where someone has got to make a life and death decision, and they've got to, they literally have to play God, and that fractures their moral compass. So the work you're doing really is very much needed, and it sounds to me that you're holding the mirror up to government, really, aren't you? Because what you're doing is you're saying, look, there's this massive need for people who you pay as the government, or we pay as the taxpayer, I guess.
Yeah.
And what you're doing about it. So it sounds to me like you're making them look in the mirror, aren't you? When every time you make a film or you talk about it, you're saying this is what's happening. And if there's anybody who's in Parliament listening to the podcast, I'm sure they all tune in between Prime Minister's question time. Maybe you want to get in contact with Claire and say, can we send some money your way, maybe?
Sure. I mean, it's difficult. During the pandemic, I had a meeting with the Prime Minister, the Health Secretary, and, we had big discussions about, they said to me, Frontline19 are doing something that we can't do. You've been really quick. You've organised it. The amount of people at that point, I think we had about 6,000 volunteers working for us. And just to be clear, I've always wanted to kind of look after our volunteers. So we give them a package. So it's not just a case of us taking the time. They give us an hour a week and we give them supervision or paperwork. We give them really extensive training, so safeguarding. We did training during the pandemic with Vessel van der Kolk. Who else? Babette Rothschild. So that's the kind of exchange of energy. They give us time and then we give them really good CPD learning and kind of all of that support and stuff. So we had these discussions with the government and, when you look at the stats around this, and I've had to get more into this type of thing, which is not really my bag, but here there was a recent survey where 76% of NHS workers have experienced poor mental health. 52% have struggled with anxiety. 51% have had really low mood. 42% have experienced exhaustion. And 70% of those people said that it was work that had negatively impacted their mental health. And so the upshot of that was 1 in 4 frontline workers within the NHS had considered taking their own lives in the last 12 months.
That's a shocking statistic.
It is absolutely shocking. And the thing is, that's just what we know about, because this community, the unusual thing about this community, and I guess this was a huge part of my learning, is that the community is very secretive. There's a big blame culture within any frontline services. They're not very good at kind of saying how they feel, or even, I think because they're used to looking after other people, they're not particularly comfortable seeking support for themselves, and they have a lot of should, I should be okay, which is just the job that I signed up for. And any human being that has seen and experienced some of the things that they have, quite understandably, needs support. I've needed support just dealing with it on a kind of second-hand level over the last 4 years. So, yeah, the stats are really shocking, and I suspect the problems are that much higher, and that there are a lot more people struggling, but they stay forward and kind of let people know. One of the biggest questions, or the most common question I always get asked, are you going to tell anyone I'm making contact with you? And the answer is always no. We're independent, of course. We're ethical. We abide by, keeping people safe, and all the guidelines alongside that. But yeah, we're independent. We keep it confidential because the main thing is about helping the people that are helping us. Yeah.
And the thing is, we ask them to do the jobs. I think sometimes my father was a soldier, and we ask people to do the jobs which we might not want to do ourselves. We may turn our face away from.
Absolutely.
Unless you've done it, I think unless you've done that type of work, you really the general public haven't got any idea of what you have to what frontline workers have to face on a day-to-day basis. And it's not just what we would think as the usual things. It's hostility from the public. It's it could be hostility within organisations. And it can also be that prevailing idea of the work being done is somehow low value. That it's a very low value work. Where in fact you would change if you held that opinion. If someone held that opinion, they may very well change it. Should they need a paramedic or a fire officer or a police officer in an emergency, I'm sure they wouldn't be saying, "Oh, it's low value work." Then. So it sounds to me like very, 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 very important work. So if someone decides to volunteer for you, what is the procedure? What would be the next steps?
So you go to our website and there's a form that you can fill in to just kind of put what your experience is and kind of maybe some of the hours that you can, or the hour that you can offer. And then we go through a process, so we check that people are qualified, that they are part of a membership body, because obviously we have to be mindful of the community that we're serving are quite vulnerable. So we have to make sure we had conversations during the pandemic with people offering support that perhaps wouldn't be the best people to help this kind of community. So yeah, you go to our website, you tell us, a little bit about yourself and what you can offer, and then we get in touch and we check kind of your paperwork and make sure that we're a good fit for each other. And then we have some training that you can do, and then you're off and running. But we're always available for support, so that if somebody has a safeguarding query, they can come back to us. And it's a very simple process, but one that we've worked really hard on to make as easy as possible, so that people can kind of do work and it's not bogged down. And we want to make sure our volunteers feel supported at all times, because I think that's important too, because they don't always feel supported.
Yeah, so if you want to help the people that help us, the kind of unsung heroes, if you pop across to the website, we'll put a link in the website, and if that's something that's that's something that interests you, why don't you get in contact with Frontline19, and maybe you can help them out, and you'll be helping an organisation that's actively sitting in front of the people in power and actively telling them that they need to pay people for therapy. You've done this at the highest level. You've sat in front of the flipping Prime Minister, haven't you? You've sat in front of the Prime Minister
several times.
Yeah, so you'd be joining a campaigning organisation that wants to make sure therapists are paid. I guess isn't turning a blind eye to the fact that there's such a great need out there.
It's really hard, because it's about balancing up, pushing forward, because therapy is important. And I, perhaps I'm biased, but I think it would really help. And when you look at it just from a view, without even going into the human cost, but the financial point of view of how much money it would save the NHS if there was a proper support service there. And I often campaign, NHS practitioner health is one smaller organisation that is paid for by the government. They had their funding removed recently, and I campaigned for them, because I do believe that this should be something that the government pay for and look after, the very people that need that support. So, yeah, it is about advocacy, us standing up and saying, look, this is holding a mirror to, you asked these people to support you, and now it's time that you support them. But, yeah, any questions or queries, we're always happy to have a conversation with people about what we do and how we do it. But the main thing is we serve a community that desperately needs the support, and that's something we're very, very passionate about. Yes,
well, Claire Goodwin-Fee, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. And if you are a frontline worker out there listening to this, thank you for your service. I think that maybe we need to bring that. It's an American idea, but I think we should thank people for their service, because, they are the people we call on when we can't deal with things ourselves. So, Claire, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Massive thank you to Claire, and of course again to you, Rory, for reaching out and holding those important discussions. Today, an inspirational one indeed. And as we move out of Practice Matters, we go headfirst into Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com. And of course, Student Services is where we recognise you, the student, on your academic journey. And as we put this out in real time, which is end of May, beginning of June, we recognise that chances are you may be coming to the end of a stage of your course, and you may be going on to a different level of your course or in another year of your course when the new academic year starts in September, as it is in the United Kingdom. And one of the questions we see so often asked is, well, what can I do during my summer break? What should I be reading? Can I get some resources? Can I prepare myself for this next leg of the journey, Rory? And that's what we're going to talk about, and maybe share some good resources and things today.
Absolutely. And I think that this is the time of year that we see a lot of people selling books. Certainly, if you go to our Facebook group, just go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, and you'll find our Facebook group, and you'll see a lot of people buying and selling books because they're coming to the end of the courses. And I think it's a great time. Books are expensive. I buy a fair few books through the year, and they're not cheap. They're not cheap at all. So I think there's a real good opportunity to pick some books up. So my observation would be, if you're buying books on theory, maybe you're buying books on transactional analysis, or maybe Carl Rogers books, you can buy those virtually very, very cheaply. And there's no kind of risk in buying older versions, because the theories, what was written by the original theorists, isn't going to change. What usually you find is there's different introductions. So you find with new editions, someone writes an introduction and a preface page sharing their observations, but actually the actual theories don't change. So the first thing is, if you can get yourself a good copy of the Carl Rogers Reader or TA Today, or any of the books that you might find on your course, go and get them. The only book that I would buy new, and I think I've probably said this quite a few times on the podcast through the years, is buying books on ethics, because ethics do change and the ethical frameworks are updated. So if you're going to buy a book, try and buy the latest. If there's one new book that you hope someone's going to buy you for a birthday or a present, ask for a book on ethics, because that is obviously going to be really, really up to date. And also, if you're a student and you're starting a new course, or you're going on to maybe the second or third year of the course you're on, ask your tutor what reading list they would recommend. Say, what would you suggest that we read over the summer break? And there you've got a head start. You don't have to read it cover to cover, but you can just dip in and dip out. So you've got a real sense of what may be being taught in the next academic year while you sat on your sun lounger, or sat in the garden, or sat wherever you are, looking at the appearance of the sun in the UK, which comes out about twice a year recently.
If you're lucky.
So yeah, it does, doesn't it? It comes out and then it goes in. You never see it again for another year. So why not just take some time, get ahead? The other tip I'd give you is, if you're doing a course by an awarding body, say CPCAB, you can actually find the criteria on their website that you might be covering. Have a look at it. You can download this; it's openly available, and design your own reading list. If they're talking about ethics or relational depth or any of those things, have a look and see if there's anything that you can kind of. We used to call it mugging up when I was younger. Yeah. Mug up on it. To keep you fresh, and then you've got a bit of a head start when you get back to class in September.
Yeah, and that was great advice on not buying secondhand ethic books, or it can be secondhand, but you're looking for the latest editions, because ethics are changing all the time. The other thing to consider is the law as well, depending on where you are in the world. I remember when I was doing my studies, I had a book, Counselling and the Law, and I know that the law has changed since then. Legislation can change from time to time. It certainly did here massively in the United Kingdom when GDPR came out. And then that changed again when it became UK GDPR. So law and ethics change often. Theory and skills, they pretty much stay as they are. You pretty got a safe bet on theory and skills. Counselling Tutor have a few books that you might want to consider. One is Basic Counselling Skills, a student guide. It was written for students, and it's about how to kind of practice your skills, get together with peers, and it gives some pointers on that. That was written by myself, Kenneth Kelly, and then of course, Rory penned a book on counselling theory, which is also worth maybe having a look at. And it's counselling theory related to the student journey as well. It's also a student guide, so that might be worth having a look at. And then, of course, there's the Counselling Tutor Podcast. That's a great resource to fill the time in between. Have a listen. You're always informing yourself. And if you go back over our back catalogue, you'll notice that Rory and I really have focused down on the entirety of the student journey. You know, you can go to counsellingtutor.com and just use the search bar at the top of the site and put in the keyword that you're looking for. And there's a high probability you're going to find a podcast about that topic. I think another great resource is YouTube, Rory. You know, there's some good stuff. I know that we've got the Counselling Tutor YouTube channel, but there's also other stuff that I've seen on YouTube as well, where tutors might speak about a theory or something. It's so if you've got a theory or a keyword, you might pop it into YouTube. That's a lovely free resource as well. And then, of course, we at Counselling Tutor do have a resource library for students. We call it the CSR, which stands for Counselling Study Resource. This was built by Rory and myself. We kind of oversee the build, but we bring in the experts in the topics, and the entirety of that library is mapped to what you will learn during your training. So if you're in your lecture and you have a lecture on a certain theory or topic, well, you'll find a lecture of that in the counselling study resource as well, which is really handy if you want to look ahead and prepare, but it's also really handy if you're kind of looking back and you want to recap on something and just revise on topics as well. So there's a few more resources for you. What else might somebody do, Rory? I'm thinking about maybe take a bit of a rest and take some time for self-care during a break as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, I can remember when I was a student, Ken, and certainly when I was a tutor, starting to breathe a slight sigh of relief as I saw the days get lighter and the academic term get shorter, knowing that we'd be catapulted out of the end for a little bit of rest and recuperation. And I think it's really important, if you're in client work, gaining those hours is important, but make sure that you do get some downtime, because it is a very demanding profession, and it's also the courses are very, very demanding. I've had a number of people say to me they've done degrees in lots of other things, but they found doing a level 4 in counselling the most demanding endeavour they've ever engaged in, and it is very, very full on. There's so much to learn in what seems to be such a shorter time. So make sure that you take the time and seek out, certainly if you're in the UK, that very elusive ball of sun in the sky, which we only seem to see twice a year.
I'm seeing a pattern in today's podcast, Rory. You must have seen some sun and it's probably gone again. So looking at self-care is a great exercise, and there are some nice books that kind of cover the topic of counselling, yet they're not theory or deep dive into counselling. Why Does the Cage Bird Sing is a beautiful book. Counselling for Toads is another beautiful book. There's a number of them, and I think if you look on Facebook in Counselling Tutor Facebook group, you'll see it mentioned often what people are reading and what they're getting from that. And there's also some television programs that cover counselling in a light-hearted way as a story rather than a piece of theory, and it's fun to watch and kind of surround yourself with counselling thinking, but without the deep academic dive of having to note all that. And I guess it just builds our frame of reference, Rory. It just strengthens that.
Yes, it gives us a reflexive and to some extent a reflexive kind of model to work to, and also just to reflect on the journey you've taken. It's not an easy journey to become a counsellor, and I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening to this podcast nodding their head furiously. So if you are just taking some time, just take some time for yourself. Just kick back, do the things that you like doing. There is a little. I know I should take this advice myself, but there is more to life than counselling. And do the things that you enjoy. Hug your kids, or go for a swim, or go for a run, or sit and watch the TV. Whatever makes you happy. and just take that downtime, and then you can pick it up again when you rejoin your studies. Downtime is as much as important as studying. We need to recharge our batteries, and we need to come back to the work fresh, excited, and with a renewed passion.
Oh yes, oh very, very much so, and I recognise that downtime, and I recognise the importance of it. But I also know in myself, and I speak only for me, I did have that drive where I really wanted to have a look ahead. I wanted to kind of delve into and learn more about. And if you are that way driven, then we've shared some great resources. Most of them free. The only one that is paid is the books, of course, if you're buying books, whether second-hand or new. And of course, Counselling Study Resources has a small fee with it. Luckily, it's kind of less than a coffee per month for Counselling Study Resources. And if you are a member of Counselling Study Resources and you want something to do over the break and you don't particularly want to deep dive into theory, we've got an amazing section in the student resources on CPD, and we put that in. We take it from our qualified member CPD library where it is appropriate, and what that is there for is maybe to have a look and see what resonates with you. What might you go into when you finish your studies? What might your future career look like? And you might look at something like equine therapy and go, wow, that really gets me because I've got horses and I can do that. Or walk and talk therapy, and it's a number of professionals in their fields sharing their day-to-day of what they do within their practice in certain specialisms. So that might be another way to spend some time without having to remember theory and delve too deeply. But whatever you choose to do over your break, we wish you well, and we wish you rejuvenation. There's the word I was looking for, as you prepare for the next leg of your journey. And of course, if you're finishing your studies and about to go into practice, we wish you well too.
Absolutely, and just if you're finding it a bit tough, just stick with it. I was saying to Mrs. Counselling Tutor just the other day that it seemed that when I was taking my course, I did a 2-year diploma. It seemed absolutely forever. 20 years later, it seems like the blink of an eye. Yeah. And that's strangely enough, that was the observation given to me by my first tutor. She said, once you qualify, the time you studied will be the blink of an eye. And she was very wise, my first supervisor. So she was indeed correct. The time does go, and eventually you'll spend time just kind of hopefully fondly looking back at the incredible journey that you've taken.
And we've enjoyed today's journey with you. This has been episode 303 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical, sustainable practice, safeguarding clients when counselling online, food for thought for those who decide to work in the online environment. In Practice Matters, we caught up with Claire Goodwin-Fee to hear her inspirational story of starting an organisation to support those unsung heroes of frontline working and supply them with therapy because they can go through a very difficult time. And then finally, in student services, Ken and myself had a bit of a preamble around buying books and also taking time to look after yourself in the forthcoming academic break. Now, before you go, if you thought that our conversation was useful or you enjoyed our conversation, why don't you leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform? It cheers us up no end, and it's a simple way of supporting us and helping the community grow. And if you know someone who might appreciate today's episode, share it on your social medias and get it out there so it may be of help to other people. And we're very grateful that you've chosen to be with us, and we come along with you on your practice journey. So as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.